everybody, to today's Fireside Chat. I'm Jeff Finkel, CEO of the Arcview Group, and I'm really excited about today's program because data is king. I used to think cash was king. And don't get me wrong, cash is still royal, but data is truly king because good data, when used properly, enables thoughtful business decisions in all aspects of business, including manufacturing, driving efficient business operations, and most importantly, consumer buying patterns, product positioning, and brand promise. And that's the subject for today in our aptly titled event, Dispelling Myths Around Brand Loyalty with our partner, Headset Data. So we're confident that the brand managers and emerging entrepreneurs in our audience will come away with a better understanding of how to use consumer data to inform brand strategy. All right, before I pass it off to our moderator, David Abernathy, I'd like to first thank our alliance partners for their support of Arcview events. Erica, maybe you could put up the slide. So thank you to all of you guys. You really enable this for us. AlphaRoot, Dwayne Morris, GrowFlow, Green Growth CPAs, our newest, Ice Miller, ProClinical, Work, and the Zuber Law Firm. So thank you for all. Thank you, you guys. You're really very important to us. All right, let me give you a quick preview of some upcoming Arcview events and activities. On October 14th, we're hosting our Arcview, Massachusetts Town Hall. I believe that's at 1 p.m. Eastern. 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. I think that's the 8th or 9th town hall that we've done in that series. On October 19th to 22nd, please come visit us at MJ BizCon. We're going to have a booth, so we welcome you all to come by and say hello. We recently launched our Arcview membership, our Arcview Access membership, that grants unlimited access to webinar replays like the one you're seeing today, live, as well as a number of other exclusive networking benefits. So for more information, please reach out to, and maybe you could put this in the chat. Thank you. I see Laura put it in the chat. membership@arcviewgroup.com. We have an upcoming interactive Women's Inclusion Network workshop on October 25th that will be led by Journey One Ventures. So for more information about becoming a Women's Inclusion Network member, please visit, and I think we'll put this in the chat as well, if we have, thank you, www.arcviewgroup.com/win. So hopefully we'll see you and you can participate and benefit from these events. So lastly, before I pass this off to David to begin the formal program, I think there's going to be a survey that's going to pop up, probably going to pop up as I pass it off. Please fill it out so we can receive feedback from you about our event offerings so that we can become a better event producer for you. And with that, please let me just now welcome David to our virtual stage and pass it off to him to begin our program. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Thanks, Jeff, and thanks everyone for showing up. This is a topic that I'm certainly passionate about. Brand loyalty and even the concept of brand strategy was really nascent when I joined the cannabis industry in 2009, and as the industry has developed, it took a long time for brands to really start being able to focus on brand strategy in the ways that we see this happening in other industries. When we started Arcview Market Research in 2013, I would have given my left leg for the kind of data that companies like Headset are able to provide about the industry. One of the things that we do with our consulting clients on a regular basis is help them understand their consumers, understand the behavior of their consumers, and use that to inform their brand strategy. We've often done this kind of work using survey data, and survey data is a really useful tool for getting at consumer sentiment and understanding consumer demographics and archetypes. But there are also some pretty big limitations to survey data. And about a month ago, I attended a headset data night where they talked about a new offering that they were rolling out specifically around brand loyalty and brand affinity. And headset's data has been invaluable in our work with consulting clients. So I'm very excited to have Headset on with us to share some of what they've been working on and discuss these topics in more depth. So today we've got two fantastic folks from Headset joining us. Liz Connors, who is the VP of Data and Analytics at Headset, and Jewel Luray, who is the Senior Product Manager. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having me, David. I brought my authentic fake fireplace for our fireside chat.
Excellent. So yeah, why don't I hand this off to the two of you to start sort of introducing the company, what Headset is and what you do, and then we can start to dig into some of the data that you make available to customers and what that says about the industry and how brands operate.
Yeah, absolutely. Can everybody see my slides okay before we get started? Yeah, great. Well, I'm going to let Jewel take us away then.
Yeah, thank you so much, David, for the intro. So we're just going to give you like a little brief overview of what Headset does so that you understand where this data that we're showing you today comes from. And then we're going to get right into it. And we're going to talk about brand loyalty and three real parts of brand loyalty. So repeat purchase rates, switching behaviors, and wallet share. And then at the end, we'll have some time for some audience Q&A, and we'll be having some Q&A with David throughout it, because I think there's going to be a lot of interesting conversations that pop up as we go through this. So again, we've got Liz Connors, the incredible Liz Connors, one of my favorite people in the whole world, our VP of Data and Analytics. And I'm Jewel Luray. I'm the Senior Product Manager for Headset. My job is basically just making sure that Liz has what she needs to do all of her brilliance in delivering it to you. So I just wanted to go over a little bit what we do at Headset, where our data comes from. So we have three main products at Headset, and I'm going to actually start with the middle one there, Headset Retailer, because that's really where we get our data from. So Headset Retailer is basically like a BI team in a box for retailers. What we do is we take all of the data from your point of sale and we serve it back to you in super readable, super actionable dashboards that you can use for inventory, for marketing, for assortment. We even recently released some things to help you do employee management. So that's where our data comes from, is that retailers connect their point of sales. And then our next thing there to the right of retailer is Headset Bridge. And so Bridge is really about creating a tool that allows retailers and vendors to collaborate and look at their inventory. A vendor can look at their inventory within a retailer shop and know, like, okay, we need to get them trained up on how to sell this tool, how to sell this product, or we need to restock this product because it's flying off the shelves. So lots of communication that can be enabled there. So then we take all of that data and Liz does a bunch of math to it, and that's what becomes Headset Insights, which is our market intelligence tool, where we're taking that point of sale data and we're turning it into full market reads of what's going on in a market. And I'll let Liz explain a little bit more of how that process works.
Yeah, thanks, Jewel. I love to talk about the mathy bits. Those are my favorite bits. In high school, I made friends by doing people's math homework for them. And now as an adult in the business world, I make my business acquaintances by doing their math for them. So what I want to talk about today is the data process that makes insights. And I'd like you to be aware of it because that's most of the data that we'll be looking at today. So like Jewel mentioned, we get real-time data connections from retailers across the United States and Canada. Today, that sits at over 2,000 retailers. We get their point of sale data. So every time someone comes in and spends some money or swipes their credit card, we get information about what's purchased. I believe that for every dollar spent on cannabis legal cannabis across the world, about 30 cents comes into our database. And me and a team come together and take that data and turn it into market insights. The one or the bit of market insights that we'll talk about today is actually some of the customer data. So part of our data is an anonymous customer ID that attaches to it some demographic information. So you would not know from the data what Liz Connors did, but you would know that a 37-year-old female shops about twice a month, and she buys a lot of beverages, given the fact that beverages are only about 1.5% of the market. You would also know, if we're telling secrets, that I mostly buy pre-rolls because I'm far too lazy to roll my own joints. So these are the kind of things that we can gather. We can also see the products I try and maybe don't buy again. Some of those beverages are a little too sweet. I have to worry about my blood sugar. Or you can see things that I love and continue to buy over time. So that's the data we're going to look at today. Is we're going to dig into within the consumer, so intra-consumer analysis, and then take that out to a macro level and decide what are consumers doing over time. So to get started, let's think about why branding matters. Why does brand loyalty matter? This is one of my favorite slides. I think Jewel put this together. But so here is original cannabis branding. This is not super inspiring, right? That is not what the market looks like today for anyone that's been inside of a cannabis retail store, whether it's a medical dispensary, in a small town, or like the big giant Planet 13 in Vegas. This is not what we see on shelves, right? These products are sleek, they're branded, they have targeted audiences, targeted consumers. And there's a lot of thought that goes into branding. At the same time, there's a lot of mind share that goes into attracting and acquiring that consumer. So what we want to do today is look at some of the branding choices that lead to brand loyalty. So brand loyalty can be defined, oh my gosh, so many ways. I can already see David like thinking he's going to make me define it like 90 more ways than I already have here. There are a ton of ways to think about it. I don't have time to do that today, unfortunately, though I would love to do that someday. But so today we're going to keep it a little more high level, and we're going to think about brand loyalty as the tendency of consumers to continue purchasing the same product over time. The thing I want to start us out with to begin with, though, is brand loyalty is neither good nor bad. It is a strategy. So having high brand loyalty can for sure be a really great strategy for brands. Having low brand loyalty can also be a strategy, though. There are plenty of brands that compete on things like price or compete on things like trying to get new consumers into the market. So there are plenty of ways to have a branding strategy that doesn't necessarily mean high brand loyalty. But what we want to do as a brand is think about, are we going after high brand loyalty? And does the actual trends that we're observing as a brand reflect what we're trying to do, right? We should always be seeing what we're trying to do take place. Otherwise, we might need to change our strategy. So today we're going to talk about most of this through the lens of a couple vapor pen brands in the state of California. And we will talk about 3 different types of brand loyalty. I'm going to start us off by talking about repeat purchase rates and switching behaviors. And then Jewel is going to conclude everything by talking about wallet share. So to get started, we'll do repeat purchase rates. This is the percentage of your customers that repurchase your brand in a set period of time. So you have a group of people that come in, they buy your brand, they take your products home, they eat them or smoke them or drink them, and then they come back in the store, and what do? Do they buy your product or do they buy a competing product? So if you are an average vapor pen brand in California, you would find that a little less than half of your customers that came back to stores and bought a vapor pen bought one of your vapor pens. And a little more than half of your customers actually only bought competing brands. So they came back in and they bought only your competitors. Now, one thing I want to point out is the light green bit of the circle where they bought your brand and other brands. So about a third of your customers will buy your product and other products. This is okay. This is actually remarkable, especially if you come from like a CPG background. This is a lot of brand loyalty, especially those ones that 13% of people that buy only your brand. That's a really big deal. Imagine if you were in the alcohol space and you found that people were buying only your brand, right? There's a person and they only drink Miller Lite, right? They drink no other brands of beer. That's an unusual person. We don't see brand loyalty like that in consumer packaged goods. People have varied tastes. People like to consume different products on different occasions. So I actually think that this brand loyalty is a very high amount of brand loyalty, especially when we think about other goods. So this is our place to baseline, and this is just an average vapor pen brand. What we want to do is talk about some brands in particular. So there on the left, what I did was just copy the data from the prior slide and make it a bar instead of a pie. And that's our average brand there. And then next to it, I put two particular brands. I put Stizzies, and I put Plug Play. Now these brands are super distinct because they're proprietary pads, right? So if you buy a Stizzy battery, the only thing you can put in that battery is a Stizzy pod. You can't get a PAX pod. You can't get a 510. It won't. I mean, I suppose you could hammer it in there if you wanted to, but you're for sure not going to be consuming that product after you've made that choice. So these proprietary pods, they see about 50% and 40% respectively of their customers rebuy only their products. This is exceedingly high brand loyalty, right? This is an example of when brand loyalty is very, very high. What I think is interesting here is for both of these, about 50% of their customers are still purchasing other vapor pen brands. So they have that CZ battery or that Plug Play battery in their purse or their fanny pack or their bucket. But they have another battery, right? They have a 510 battery. Maybe they have a PAX battery. So even when we're thinking about consuming vapor pens and you have to buy an additional piece of hardware, people are still cross-shopping brands with those two hardwares in their hand.
This is really, I think, an interesting feature of vape pens in particular, right? There are a lot of product categories that don't have that extra piece that you need.
Oh yeah, I'm sure Gummies wishes they had some proprietary, this is how you eat it.
Yeah. And in general, right, it's interesting to look at brand loyalty across different product categories because we do see some pretty big variation in brand loyalty between things like flour and topicals, for example, right? We see a lot more brand loyalty in topicals than we do in flour. And so really understanding what the baseline is for the product category that you're looking at and building a strategy around that is important. And it's much easier to build brand loyalty around a product like topicals or around a product that has a proprietary component that you need to buy than it would be to build brand loyalty around something like flour, where there are a huge number of choices and consumers are looking at a whole variety of sort of organoleptic factors in addition to just the branding on the tin.
Oh yeah, it's tough to compete with the Pez dispenser model, which is for sure what they've come up with here. But I think you bring up a great point, David. So in flour, for example, we see almost zero, and I'm not being hyperbolic there, almost zero brand-only repeat purchases. It is much more common that we have that lighter green bar where it's your brand and another, and much, much more common that it's other brands only. There tend to be other things that drive loyalty in flour as well, outside of brands. So we see things like strain loyalty. We see things like price loyalty. One thing that I think we'd be remiss to not bring up is availability loyalty. A lot of people are very loyal to whatever's here today. That is probably the most loyalty people have. Very few people will go home without something in their hand. They will buy whatever else there is. And we do still, distribution and keeping products in stock is, even before the pandemic, was difficult for sure.
Yeah, and with that, right, if you are operating in a category that has high brand loyalty, making sure that you stay in stock is really important, because if you find, for example, a topicals customer that likes your product, and your product typically, right, people who are using topicals are using it for a specific need. They have some sort of medical or health need that that they're using the product for. And if they find a product that works, they will tend to continue to buy that product if it's available. But if it's not available and a competitor's product is, they'll buy that because they still need to solve for that need. And if that competitor's product works as well, or maybe even better than yours, now all of a sudden you've permanently lost that customer. Which,
oh yeah, for sure. You know, just because the bath bombs I like aren't in stock does not mean I'm not taking a bath tonight. Yeah,
correct. And that's less of a risk in a category like flour, where consumers are kind of jumping around. If you happen to be out of stock this time, you're probably not going to necessarily lose that customer forever. Next time you are in stock, they come back and they like what they see and they buy.
yeah, absolutely. Well, so now that we talked about some of the places where loyalty is high, I think we spoke just a touch about where loyalty is low. Let's kind of keep going within that that vapor pen category and look at some other brands. And I'm actually going to do this. Oh, what should I do, David? You want left to right here or right to left?
Up to you. I think left to right works.
All right, let's start left to right then. So we'll start with Legion of Bloom, where we see a generally lower level of product loyalty. Now, remember, I said at the start, low loyalty is not necessarily a bad thing. It very well could be a strategy. Legion of Bloom is kind of interesting because they do fill PAX pods. So PAX, if anyone's not familiar, please Google it. If you're on a cannabis webinar, you should be familiar with PAX. But if you're not familiar, PAX is a proprietary pen, and it does take proprietary pods. However, what PAX does is they make the pens and they make the pods, the hardware. They don't put any cannabis extract in them, though. They sell empty pods to their partner brands to fill with their product. So because of that, what you find is that a lot of brands that fill PAX pods tend to see a lot of switching between other PAX brands. So that person does already have that PAX cartridge or that PAX battery, and they tend to switch out for other PAX brands. They tend to be quite loyal to the PAX pen itself, but the brands in particular might not be loyal to. Now, the thing is, what this does is for all those brands that fill those pods, it opens them up to a really large group of consumers, right? A lot of people have a PAX battery. And so from a strategic standpoint, I think this can be a really good play for a brand to do this, to widen their addressable market into people that prefer a PAX pod over just a 510. And I think that this strategy can be a good one if you're not going to be a proprietary pod, though you do really have to kind of understand your strategy and make sure you're executing it well, for sure. So then when we think about, I thought David had a couple things he wanted to say about some branding things here.
Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the branding differences, the differences in visual identity and in messaging across these brands. But if you look at Legion of Bloom's branding, it's nice, it's clean, it's appealing, it's very inoffensive, and it's likely to appeal to a very, very broad audience. There aren't a lot of cannabis consumers who are likely to be turned off by anything in Legion of Bloom's messaging, and we'll contrast that a little bit to one of the other brands on this list in a little bit.
Yeah, let's do that. I said left to right, right to left. Let's go actually outside in, and let's talk about heavy hitters. Yeah. So heavy hitters, maybe it'd be better, David, for you to kind of tell them about the branding before I go through too much of the loyalty.
Sure. So Heavy Hitters is a brand that has a really clear picture of who they're targeting and what kind of branding they need to get those folks. If you look at their branding, it's very dark. It's very almost gothic, and it features, it's even the name, right? Heavy Hitters. You hear that, and you immediately can tell there are a whole host of cannabis consumers who are never going to look twice at that brand.
Oh yeah, this beverage drinker, Heavy Hitters is not something that's meant for me. Yeah.
But for the people that brand does appeal to, it really connects, right? It's something. it gets at something deep in their self-identity, and as a result, we see on this graph, right, there are people who buy heavy hitters, and that's what they buy. That's their product.
Oh, yeah. I think that brings up a really interesting point, David. And I read some research that McKinsey did last year on how how different demographic groups want to pick which brands they really like. And one of the things I found interesting is for both millennials and then Gen Z, what they found was that people in those age groups, they want to pick brands that they identify with. So they want their brands to help be part of their identity. So when you looked more at Gen Z, there tend to be more status symbol brands. And in baby boomers, it was a little bit more kind of looking for like a stability over time. But with these younger consumers, they want to wear the shirt with the brand name because that brand that they consume tends to be a portion of their identity. And I think that's super true here. This is a brand that does skew a bit younger. Thinking about their branding, thinking about their messaging, I think that's fair. But I think this is a great example of not wanting everyone to be your consumer. I think David was standing there with me after data night when someone came up to us to talk about a brand and they want everyone to be their consumer. I thought that is a great way to make no one really want to be your consumer. We can't please everyone. I think our moms taught us that when we were young as individuals. And when we're building our branding, we should also keep that advice in mind, I think. So very last there, so we went outside in, is Carvana. So Carvana kind of sits right there in the middle. But the thing I wanted to point out about Carvana that's a little bit different than heavy hitters is you see that the percent of people that defected entirely, so went to other brands entirely, is relatively similar between the two. But that mix of repurchasers is a little different. So for Carvana, they do see a repeat purchase rate, a standard repeat purchase rate of something similar to heavy hitters, but a lot more of their consumers are buying Carvana products along with an additional product. So this again is another type of repeat purchase rate. We've got the ones where they really stick with just your brand. We've got the ones where they defect a lot or change a lot. And then we've kind of got this place in between where they do repeat purchase your products, but you are a portion of their cannabis spend, not the whole amount.
And looking at the way Carvana brands themselves, you again have a pretty sort of innocuous brand that's unlikely to offend a lot of folks, especially when you look at the visual identity. The name certainly has a little bit of a target market in mind, clearly. And what Carvana has done with their vape cartridges is actually create 3 categories of vape cartridges that they sell that are targeting slightly different consumers. And this is something that we've seen more and more brands do to greater or lesser extents. But they've got like a carbon series that is designed for people who are looking for really high potency cannabis. They have another series of cannabis cartridges that is targeting people who want flavorful terpene profiles that sort of represent the underlying taste of the cannabis that's going into the pods, and another one that is sort of very mild and just focused on potency without a whole lot of extra flavor or anything offensive there. So that they've identified that there are these different kinds of things that cannabis vape cartridge consumers are looking for, and they've tried to build categories to appeal to those folks specifically. And we've seen this done to even greater extents in some other categories. If you look at the brands that a company like Kiva has built, they have their Petra mints, which are really easy. If you look at the branding and marketing around Petra mints, it's really just like THC content, and it's low THC products. If you look at something like Camino gummies, they start to talk a lot more about things like terpene profiles. And then if you look at their Lost Farm brand of edibles, they really go deep into this is for the cannabis connoisseur who wants to know a whole lot of detail about the minor cannabinoid content and the terpene profiles. So they kind of recognize that consumers are coming into the market with different levels of understanding. And if you take a brand new consumer who has never thought about cannabis before and doesn't know what the word terpene means, and you throw a bunch of this really high complexity at them, they're likely to get overwhelmed and walk away. So they've got the petriments for those customers. Conversely, if you've got a cannabis consumer who is really familiar with cannabis, cannabis is part of their lifestyle. It's part of how they self-identify. If you show them something that just says 5 milligrams THC, they're going to walk away. They're going to find something where they can really get into the kind of nerdiness of the product and how it's made. Is it solventless, and what are the cannabinoid profiles and terpene profiles?
Yeah. Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point as we think about branding strategies and building those product lines. I think, kind of what comes to mind for me, the two major product line strategies. One is to actually find yourself different types of consumers, right? Because what you don't want to do is erode maybe your own brand credibility with that group. So if you're known for maybe that like high potency strain specific gummies or whatever it is, you might not want to have that very entry level product. I think a lot of people remember Tiffany's kind of did that back in the early 2000s with those Tiffany's bracelets that they put out. It made a lot of young 20-year-olds wear Tiffany's, which made a lot of older 50-year-olds that were very wealthy not want to spend, $400,000 on a ring. So you do have to be very careful or one way to be careful and not allow that to happen is to have those product lines like that. I think another strategy that might even be equally as common in cannabis is to build your product lines to find different occasions. So we see that a lot in Canadian LPs, especially with flower. They might have a very premium product, a really kind of core product, and then a value product. That's very common in alcohol. When you think about like Miller Coors, the umbrella that sits under them, they have some very entry-level beers that are sold. We usually call those suitcases around here, right? A suitcase of beer. That's a lot of beers in one cardboard box. They have maybe that kind of middle beer, their core beer, like their Miller, and then they hold a couple of kind of more artisanal or closer to microbrew beers. A lot of people will drink all three types of those beers, even within the same, month or something, but they're for different types of occasions. And so I think there's a lot of that kind of branding happening up in Canada where the LPs are a little more consolidated. But I think the first strategy is a bit more American today.
Absolutely. And looking at that beer example, this actually brings up a really important thing for smaller brands to understand. If you're a small brand, you're not going to compete on price, right? You're not able to produce high volume product in the way that the big giant companies are. What you can do, and often much more effectively than the big companies, is create those artisanal brands, right? There's a subset of consumers, whether you're looking at the beer market or the cigar market or the cannabis market, that they're looking for something that really connects with them, that makes them feel right. And something from Miller Coors, as hard as they try, or AB InBev, right? As hard as Budweiser tries to make Budweiser Select a thing, it just doesn't land. Yeah. So what those big brands do, because they do want those artisanal brands in their portfolio, is they wait for the small folks to really create these brands that connect with consumers, and then they buy them for a lot of money, and then eventually they will dilute the sort of the promise that those brands created in the first place, and find themselves in the market again for the next new up and coming brand. So if you're a small brand, don't try to compete in areas that you can't compete with the big MSOs, and do try to find the niche that you can do better than they can. And if you do that well enough, there's probably a big exit opportunity for you if you want it, selling to those bigger folks who can't create credible artisanal brands on their own from scratch.
Oh yeah, for sure. That is definitely, that's been very common in beer, and I imagine that'll become more and more common in cannabis as the market matures, for sure. All right, that was a lot of time on one slide. We should move on. Are y'all bored of seeing this slide? Let's see. I think I made a few others. Let's see what we got. Oh, my computer even forgot how to advance slides. I left it alone for so long. There we go. All right, now let's talk about switching behaviors. So on to our second of our three measures of loyalty. Remember, these are not the only measures of loyalty. These are just the ones that we think are important to talk about today. So let's talk about some switching behaviors. So here what I did is I took that Legion of Bloom customer group. So I took everybody that bought Legion of Bloom. I think I had maybe like 70 or 80,000 customers over a 6-month period. And what I looked for was what other brands were they buying? And one of the reasons I really love to do this analysis is because I think it's a great starting point to understand your brand a little bit better. So one of the things that's difficult for us as we manage brands is to understand how consumers think about our brands, what things go through their mind as they're making that choice, right? A consumer choice is a really big part of a consumer's journey. So what types of things are they considering? And one of the things we can do before we ask consumers is see what they actually did. So what were some of their behaviors? And when we look at switching behaviors, what we're doing is we are trying to identify what types of brands are good substitutes for your brand. And maybe what we want to do is compare that to the market as a whole. So what types of, what other brands are my consumers buying over and above what the average consumer in the market buys? And this gives me a pretty good idea, or at least some pretty good hypotheses of what could be driving consumer choice there. So what I have here is the percent of people that purchased any, the percent of Legion of Bloom's customers that purchased any of these brands over the next 6-month period. We do see in there some packs makers. We see heavy hitters in there, which I think when you look at Legion of Bloom, I do think that they have some that are a bit more high THC, maybe going after that group. So I don't want to stay too much just on Legion of Bloom here, but rather treat this analysis as kind of a way to start building some hypotheses. So perhaps what you would find if you're a core brand is maybe you're being traded out quite often with value brands, right? Which could lead you to maybe wanting to have that value line. You could see that you're being traded out quite often for an effect base. Maybe you're a gummy and you see, well, geez, a lot of brands I'm being traded out for make a sleep gummy, and I don't make a sleep gummy. Is that something I need to add to my portfolio? And so these are places as a brand manager that you should be thinking about either expanding your portfolio or buying one of those noisy small brands that you just think, well, I don't know, that one's kind of in my way. I think it'd be better under my portfolio as a product line.
Yeah, this is, I mean, one of the beauties of Headset is that it makes visualizing complex data very easy. One of the things that we often do with consulting clients is get a download of data from them, and that might be wholesale data if they're a brand. Who are they selling to? How often are they selling? What are the price points? And we've dumped this into databases or spreadsheets and start to build data visualizations. And sometimes it is to support or overturn hypotheses that we have, right? Sometimes we come in and we think something about a brand and we're looking into the data to find out if what we think is supported by the data. But sometimes it's really just a sort of a blank slate exercise where we let the data create, right, drive the creation of new hypotheses. And often we'll find, like, okay, why is this outlier here, right? And let's figure out what's the driving force behind this graph that doesn't look like we expected it to look, or this bar chart where that's really skewed in a certain direction. And it takes a lot of time to build those data visualizations and to like cycle through all the various ways that you can cut up data. So, right, looking at this Legion of Bloom data, you could visualize this looking at all Legion of Bloom customers, or you could visualize it looking at just the people who primarily buy Legion of Bloom, or right, there are all sorts of different ways you can look at data like this and cut it up that will give you different insights. And the fact that Headset's platform makes it so easy to just really get a quick visual look at really complicated data is a huge time saver for brands looking to better understand themselves and their competitors.
Yeah, I mean that's been our goal from the start, as everybody out there managing their business, like that you know what's right for your business, but you do need information to make those choices. And what we hope to do is make that information super easy for you so you can spend your time making those big choices and not formatting the axis of a graph. Like that might just not be a super great use of everyone's time, or thinking about the best way to see the data, making sure the data is consistently viewed over time. And I think this type of analysis is one of my favorite examples for that, because I think to me this analysis gets done first before you engage like further branding work. So maybe what you want to do is run a focus group or execute like a large scale survey, because what you're interested in is, should I make a value product line? Should I, like to David's example with Kiva, should I build that strain specific line, right? Are there enough people? Will I cannibalize my sales? All these questions. But before you run any of those major research studies, you should have a hypothesis going in, right? Otherwise, you're not following proper scientific method, and your analysts will be bummed. But these things help you build those hypotheses to begin with, to make sure that when you do go in and do those branding studies, you're really on target, because those will be time consuming and expensive, and we want to make those be the best available, right? So before you would engage someone like David maybe to help you build that, we hope that these kind of bring those ideas up, or help David understand what the state of today is before we go to decide how could we affect the future.
Yeah, and really I can't express how important looking at data is. We have had some really big surprises working with clients when we dug into the data. Things that not just surprised us, but surprised the client, right? So we had a client, for example, who was in the process of building a brand strategy based on the idea that their products, that most of their product sales were with a particular age group. And that was a reasonable thing to assume. Looking at, right, it was a guess that I probably would have made looking at their brand. But when we dug into the data, we found out that a majority of their sales are not among that age group. One of the reasons for that is because that age group is a smaller percentage of the overall cannabis consumer market. But that realization meant that just focusing on that group didn't make sense as a brand strategy. A pretty large majority of their revenue was coming from folks that were significantly younger. And that, I think, really impacted the decisions that they went on to make in a positive way. They could have spent a lot of money and created a lot of hassle for themselves trying to target a market that wasn't their biggest market.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a similar, but maybe in the reverse direction, client where, they thought they were like the young hip brand. And it turned out they did super well among like Gen X and baby boomer females. But when you know that, right, they ended up launching a topical product along with the product they had that did very well, because that's a product that those people are looking for. And so I think as you go to build out this strategy of what to do next, really understanding who your current audience is definitely super important. But I think we've heard me talk for way too long, and it's time for the lovely Jewel LeRae to bless us with her wisdom. So I'm going to turn it over to her, and Jewel, just tell me when I need to advance your slides.
All right. I could listen to you talk all day, Liz. Never good enough. All right, let's get into it. So we're going to talk about wallet share now. It's kind of our last piece of brand loyalty here. And what we mean by wallet share is the percentage of your customers' cannabis spend that your brand acquires. And usually you would look at this within your category, but sometimes it's helpful to look at it within the other categories that these people would shop. So when we're talking about vapor pens, we might want to look at like all inhalables, like also flower, pre-rolls, concentrates, because a lot of times people will be kind of using that whole thing as their cannabis budget if they are an inhalables person. Let's move on to the next one, Liz. So to start with, I just want to kind of give you some background on why we're even talking about brand loyalty, because it's really when you're looking at what percentage of customers come to a store versus what percentage of customers drive sales, this is really common in your average retail store and for kind of your average brands when it comes to how revenue is driven. We see that a huge percent of your customers are like one trip to one basket, kind of folks that they try things once and then they never come back. But the majority of your sales tends to come from those repeat purchases. So in this case, customers making like 4 trips at least in a 6-month period, that's only 15% of our total customers, but that's 57% of our revenue. And so that's an important thing to think about when you're thinking about wallet share, because that wallet share, getting it in on getting that loyalty, getting in on those trips for those repeat customers, that's what's really going to drive your revenue. All right, next slide, Liz. So this is the wallet share of an average vapor pen customer. So an average vapor pen customer will spend about 50% of their wallet on vapor pens, with the other 50% again being on those other inhalables like flower, concentrates, pre-roll, and then like a 10% on non-inhalables. But for that 50% that's spent on vapor pens, what we see with an average vapor pen consumer is that the bulk of that, so nearly 40%, is really spent on their number one vape brand, the one that they come back to the most. That's going to be what they buy the most. And then number 2 and number 3 are kind of trailing behind at about 5% each. So there is a high amount of customer loyalty in vapes. And that's what we've kind of been talking about this whole time, right? This is not something you see necessarily in other categories like flower, like concentrates, like pre-rolls. So that's a really interesting thing that makes when you're thinking about branding as a vape company, knowing this information, I think is really important, because that's a huge number of people coming back and buying the same brand. So you really want to make sure that, when they try your brand for the first time, that they're going to want to come back. You're not getting, clogged hardware, you're not getting leaks, it doesn't taste bad or evaporates too quickly or anything like that, because once you get a customer into your brand, you're really getting them into it for a good long time, hopefully.
And this also can help drive another really important piece of strategy, which is how to expand. There are a lot of companies looking at expanding to other states, and we're helping a lot of companies prioritize which states to go into. This is really kind of a unique feature of the cannabis market, that we have such a siloed supply chain state by state, making it really complex to scale across state lines. Mm-hmm. So another strategy that some brands who have kind of saturated their current state market are looking at is different product categories, right? If I'm a vape brand, I can, right, and I think I've done what I can in California. Maybe I look at Nevada, maybe I look at Oregon, maybe I look at a new market that's coming online to try to move my brand and continue growth that way. But another thing I could do is start making edibles, or start making flower, right? Start making another product category in my own state. And often there's an easier path to doing that than expanding to another state, just because of the complexities that operating across multiple states brings. But it's important to know, right? If you're a brand that has high brand loyalty, you've really connected with consumers, are those consumers consuming the kinds of products that you're thinking of moving into, right? Okay. So maybe for a vape brand that has high brand loyalty already, edibles are not as good a choice as flower, for example, because your consumers are already spending on flower, and maybe you can create a flower brand and get those people who are already loyal to your vape brand to start buying your flower brand as well. So this kind of data, looking at it sort of generally across product categories, is super useful, and looking at it specifically, understanding your consumers and what else your consumers are doing, what they're spending money on, is a really good way to build a strategy around growing sort of laterally into other product categories within the states that you're currently in.
Absolutely. I think looking at wallet share from your customers, like we're looking at right now, but then also like testing that, who do I think my customers are demographically and what do their wallet shares look like, right? So if I'm this number one vape brand here and the majority of my customers and who I'm really targeting are Gen Z folks, and the kind of their occasions for use or social, it's on the go, they're young, they're out, maybe it makes sense for me to move into like pre-rolls more than concentrates, because concentrates is something you really do at home, right? You're not walking around with a dab rig, hopefully. That seems dangerous. But pre-rolls are something that is social, it's out. If you're like going for young people, that might be a better way to do it. So looking at wallet share, I think across a lot of different things, not just who your customers already are, who you want your customers to be, and what consumers of the kind of products you already make. I think those are all like good levels to look at and kind of compare. And maybe you can find some niches to fit into by doing that.
I'm sorry to hop on and cut your presentation short, Jewel. I know that Liz and Jewel, we could go on and on about this because it's just so fascinating, but we have tons of questions from the audience. So I think we need to hop in on that. Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Falva, the Director of Community here at the Arcview Group, and we are going to jump into some of these questions. Unfortunately, we won't be able to get to all of them today, but we will try to get some answers from Headset beyond this program and kind of go from there. So, ladies, some of the first questions. Basically, how do these trends differ in medical-only states versus adult use states? Do you kind of see the same trends, the brand loyalty, things like that?
Yeah, there definitely are some differences. And honestly, even adult use market to adult use market in the US can be very different because we have very different laws, very different regulatory setups. In Canada, we see provinces act a bit more similar to one another, but in the US, there are quite large differences. In particular with medical consumers, you do often find true medical consumers that are actually using cannabis to solve a legitimate problem in their life tend to be a bit more brand loyal than people that are using cannabis for a recreational purpose, whether they're acquiring it medically or at in an adult use store. We see for people that are truly medical users, we also see their spend be a lot higher. And so while they are pretty brand loyal, that wallet of theirs is much larger. And so being the third tier brand to a medical consumer actually might net you more revenue as a brand than being a first tier brand to a recreational consumer. But it does vary a lot by market for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head with how much of this industry is driven by the regulations. And looking at for a lot of cases, looking at medical versus adult use states isn't as informative as looking at specific states. Because if you look at a state like Utah, that's a medical state, and so is Oklahoma. Their markets couldn't be more different, and that's largely driven by the regulatory landscape that those states have put in place. Oklahoma looks a lot more like most adult use states than like most medical states.
Great. And are you finding that there is a significant demand for craft and artisanal cannabis?
Yeah, so I am such an analyst, and my answer is always just like, well, it depends. I can't answer a question straight. We're actually not allowed to. We have to take an oath.
And that's okay.
Yeah. So for sure there is demand for it, and those people again spend a lot of money. But just like connoisseur is a segment of consumer in all other aspects of consumer consumption. Consumer consumption was redundant there. But so in all aspects of consumption, a connoisseur group is a very powerful group. They tend to spend a lot. They might not necessarily be the largest group driving sales. So to be a connoisseur, one, you have to have the taste for it. Two, you want to dedicate a more substantial portion of your disposable income toward that activity. And then you have to, be willing to be engaged in this almost as a hobby, right? Like connoisseur really indicates hobby. And so there very much are those people, and they come out quite early. So when markets are new, that's really who we see flood into the markets. And to get that more like occasional user kind of takes some time to build. Though I do think that's probably where the bulk of growth is occurring today, is bringing some of those people that cannabis is maybe not like, they're not a connoisseur for sure. They're the person that wouldn't order like a fine Pinot Noir. Like they would probably order like something red, right? But they do actually spend a pretty substantial portion of money on cannabis products.
And looking at how cannabis compares to other markets, you can see some really interesting trends. For one thing, cannabis is still very much coming out of this era of prohibition, and a lot of the market dynamics are still prohibition era market dynamics. So if you look at, for example, how people bought alcohol during the prohibition, they bought the highest proof alcohol they could find, and that's what suppliers were supplying, partly out of necessity, right? You don't want to, if you're bootlegging, you don't want to move a bunch of really low alcohol beer across state lines when you can make this like 100 proof, 150 proof alcohol and get a lot more sort of bang for your buck, if you will. Looking at how other markets have evolved, we see similar things. So good coffee used to be strong coffee, right? That was it. It was the stronger the coffee, the better. That's no longer how people buy coffee. It's no longer how people buy alcohol. There are all sorts of other things that folks are looking for. And really, there's a role for brands to play in helping to build and maintain the culture of connoisseurship in the cannabis space. If you look at non-durable goods markets that have a strong culture of connoisseurship, every single time you see opportunity for small businesses to compete with large businesses. You see opportunities for these artisanal brands, these connoisseur brands, but that's not the case in markets that don't have a strong culture of connoisseurship. Smoked tobacco is an interesting one. Cigarettes don't have a strong culture of connoisseurship. You walk into a store, you've got 50 choices of cigarettes. They're all the same price, plus or minus $1 or $2, and they're all made by a few big multinationals. But if you look at cigars, where they do have that strong culture of connoisseurship, and there's Cigar Magazine and Cigar of the Month clubs and people on message boards talking about how cigars are manufactured, you do see that huge variation in pricing and the ability for smaller cigar producers to operate profitably alongside the big multinationals.
For sure, yeah.
That's great. And very interesting comparisons, David. I appreciate that. So what kind of trends are you seeing in brick and mortar retail versus online retail? I'm not sure how much of that data you capture from e-commerce and things like that, delivery, but share what you have.
Yeah, for sure. That's one of those things that has changed so much, right? That is that new normal. That's like, it's not very normal, but it's new every 3 minutes. But yeah, so for sure, when you think about delivery, those baskets are much larger. But that's actually true everywhere. I used to work in grocery retail, and our delivery basket, our average ticket at a register was somewhere between $25 and $45, depending on the format of the store. But our average ticket for delivery was closer to $90. And that's usually because you want to make that delivery fee worth it, right? Like we, as consumers, we've got this idea that we have to make that delivery fee worth it. You probably do it with your Uber Eats or with your Instacarts. You'll do the same thing with your cannabis purchases for sure. Another thing is to think about how different the shopping experience is when you're buying online versus in store, and the type of consumer that would be better suited for. So whether it's a personality type that maybe doesn't want all of that, talking to a bud tender, that might be an overwhelming amount of talking right now, given our COVID trends, or a person that I don't want to have to justify to you why I like pineapple pancakes, back off. I know what I want. Or, it might be the person that wants to do their own research online, or you might have people that want to go in and whether, learn what's cool and interesting or ask a question like, which of these is better for sleep? So I think it really kind of, it has changed a lot, but I think it's changed very particular consumer groups to be differently.
Absolutely. And this is just one last question. So, as the industry expands, as brands are expanding state to state and going into new territories, they're going to have to build up that brand loyalty from the ground up, more or less, correct? Because if they don't have that brand in that particular state, they don't really know about it. They haven't tried it before. And a lot of the cases in these other states, other white labeling is happening. So it's not the same flour that you're getting in California that you would get in Michigan. So what is that like for companies expanding into new states, trying to recreate that brand loyalty? Is that actually happening? Are you seeing, the top sellers in California successfully moving into a different market and having the same success?
Yeah, I'm sure y'all saw the lines outside of Cookies when they opened up in, was it Nevada, I think, where it was like, you would have thought that they were selling the new iPhone 13. There were so many people outside. And so I think, I think Kiva's had a lot of success going into multiple markets. I think Wana has. So I think for sure you can carry on that brand loyalty if you like. Though there's definitely people that haven't had much success as well. And so I think you can do it, but it is not a guaranteed success. Just because you did it well in California does not mean you're going to do well in another state. A couple California brands famously tried to enter Nevada and then slowly, like the Homer Simpson meme, faded out.
Yeah, there are some brands who have been really successful at this. Others not so much. Wild has done a great job. Kiva, when you look at Kiva and the states that they choose to move into, they're very strategic in looking for states where they do think that they can be one of the dominant edibles brands. Mm-hmm. And so they might look at a state that has a lot of potential, but not move into that state because there are already several dominant brands that they would be competing against. And there are 36-ish legal cannabis markets in the United States that brands can choose to move into. They all come with their own peculiarities and challenges and market sizes and growth rates. But looking at the competitive landscape is something we spend a lot of time doing for our consulting clients, and something that's incredibly important if you want to be able to go in and really build the kind of success in a new state that you may have already built in the state you started in.
Absolutely. Well, we are past our time to wrap up. So I just wanted to thank Jewel and Liz from Headset again. Thank you for your data. Thank you for your insight. Thank you for sharing your time with us. And David, always great to see you and hear your take on everything as well. So thank you so much from the Arcview Group. And just a reminder, we will be at MJ BizCon at a booth. So come by, stop and say hello and chat with us more and see if you'd like to be a part of the Arcview Network in any way, shape, or form. And we have a number of programs coming up. You can check out our website at arcviewgroup.com. And as Jeff mentioned at the top of the program, we have relaunched our Arcview Access membership. So if you'd like to get access to things such as a replay of this program and our other webinars, we'd love for you to join as a member. There's a number of other perks as well. So thank you again for joining us. We hope to see you soon and have a great day. Bye, everyone.